Marry her. Lucien Varga's shocked whisper cut through the still, musty air of his late father's old office. The woman I just saw sleeping under the Strada del Ponte bridge? Is this some kind of terrible joke, Emilio? Or has my father's strange thinking somehow come alive after death? Emilio Costa, the aging lawyer with eyes full of sadness and deep wrinkles from many sleepless nights, didn't say anything. He only shook his head slowly. A wrinkled copy of Alessandro Varga's will still sat on the wide oak table between them. Outside, the loud cries of ambulance sirens echoed down the cold, hard streets of Milan. It sounded like the end of something big, the fall of Varga Media International. And now Lucien, the 40-year-old CEO with a smooth, untouched designer suit and a heart colder than the winds off Lake Como, was facing a demand more strange than anything he had ever imagined, just to stop that fall. The air inside Emilio Costa's time-worn law office, hidden along a narrow cobblestone street in Milan's old city district, felt heavy. It smelled like old books, dust, and quiet. Lucien Varga, age 40, temporary head of Varga Media International, sat frozen in a leather chair that had clearly seen better years. His expensive dark suit looked strange here, in a place filled with cracked walls and aging shelves. Lucien's face, handsome but sharp at the edges, looked tired and thin. His piercing silver blue eyes, always alert and cold like steel, seemed sunken now. Behind them, nothing but silence and a feeling that something had broken inside him. Emilio Costa, a weary old lawyer with soft wrinkles and thinning snow-white hair, cleared his throat gently. Behind his thick, round glasses, his brown eyes were filled with something between sorrow and worry. The quiet room, filled with the smell of old paper and fading wood polish, seemed to lean in to listen. He held the final page of the will in his shaky hands, his fingers gripping the paper as if afraid it might crumble. Then he spoke. "And now, the last condition," Emilio said softly, his voice barely louder than the ticking wall clock. "This is the final part of Alessandro Varga's will." Lucien Varga sat still across from him, dressed in his sleek Italian suit, not a hair out of place. But his eyes had changed. They weren't sharp or icy like before. Now they looked like he had been hit by something too big to understand. His hands tightened around the arms of the chair, his knuckles pale. Emilio continued reading. "For the full inheritance, which includes the Varga family estate in Tuscany, the Santorini villa, the Madrid penthouse, and the controlling shares of Varga Media International, along with a personal fund of 1.2 billion euros. Lucien blinked once. Slowly. The numbers didn't surprise him. What did was what came next. "To receive and manage these assets," Emilio read on, "Lucien Alessandro Varga must enter into a lawful marriage within 90 days of the public announcement of this testament." The words dropped like stones. The room fell silent again. Lucien leaned back, staring blankly at the ceiling for a moment. Then, without looking at Emilio, he whispered, "He's serious." "Yes," Emilio replied, quietly folding the paper. "Your father left no loopholes." Lucien's heart thudded in his chest, but his face barely moved. This wasn't the first strange thing his father had done, but it was surely the most impossible. "And if I don't?" Lucien finally asked. Emilio looked at him, and this time, the sadness in his eyes was clear. "If the condition is not fulfilled," he said, "everything, every euro, every property, every share, will be donated permanently." Lucien sat up. "Donated to whom?" "If after 90 days you are unable to meet this condition, the entire estate shall be surrendered, without exception, to the following charities: the International Society for Displaced Children, the Global Alliance for Youth Rehabilitation, and the Orphan Relief Foundation of Northern Europe." Lucien closed his eyes. His jaw clenched. All of it. Every last thing. Gone. And all because of one requirement: marry within 90 days. "Sir," Emilio said gently, breaking the silence that clung to the office like thick dust on old books. He looked at Lucien with quiet sympathy, his voice steady but kind. "Today is the first official reading of the will. That gives you exactly 89 days to find a bride." The words hung heavy in the air. Lucien didn't speak, but something inside him cracked open. His blood rose fast, pounding in his ears, his hands balled into fists on the arms of the chair. A storm churned in his chest. Anger, humiliation, dread. A wife. He needed a wife, not for love, not for comfort, not for happy mornings or soft words. That world was for people who had time, who believed in hearts and stars and magic. Lucien Varga never had time for any of that. Love? That was weakness. That was distraction. He had spent his life chasing only one thing: power. He built empires, not homes. He bagged deals, not feelings. He wore ambition like a crown, sealed his heart in stone, and never looked back. And yet here he was, trapped in the very thing he spent years avoiding, not by choice, but by duty. He had to do this, not because he believed in fairy tales, but because he could not bear the taste of failure, not in front of the board, not in front of the world, and not before the memory of Nonna Sofia, his grandmother, the only woman who had ever shown him what care felt like. He had made her a promise once, whispered over her fragile fingers as she lay dying in a small Sicilian hospice. "I will never let the company fall. I will not let our name be buried." And there was another reason, darker and more painful. One he never spoke of. He never got to know his mother. She had left. The moment she saw him, a newborn diagnosed with neonatal hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, a form of brain injury caused by lack of oxygen during birth, she disappeared from his life like a ghost. The doctors worked miracles, multiple surgeries, years of therapy, and against all odds, he grew stronger, smarter, sharper, but she never returned, too ashamed, too afraid, or maybe too heartless. He didn't know. All he knew was the shadow she left behind. So no, Lucien didn't care about love. He didn't believe in it. What he needed now was not a soulmate. He needed a solution, fast, no drama, no emotional mess, no fairy tale endings, just one name on a marriage certificate, one signature, and his empire would survive. Everything else could come later, or never. The pressure was unbearable. Lucien couldn't focus on anything anymore. Every meeting, every document, every financial report blurred into nonsense. His mind no longer belonged to business. It belonged only to one desperate thought: find a wife. He tried working late, poring over backup plans to save Varga Media International without fulfilling the marriage clause, but each one crumbled like dust. Even when he opened social media, scrolling aimlessly through pages of polished faces and rehearsed smiles, he knew it was useless. No woman would fall into his life just like that. Not now, not in time, not without strings. The walls of his office felt like they were shrinking. The air, stale and heavy, pressed down on his chest until he could no longer bear it. He needed to move, to escape. So he left the high-rise tower without telling anyone. Dressed in shadow black, he got into his car and drove, fast, without direction, into the night. Rain tapped softly on the windshield as he passed quiet neighborhoods and flickering street lamps. Eventually, he found himself in a part of the city he had never cared to know. The river flowed nearby, dark and slow, beneath a cracked concrete bridge. That's when he saw her. A girl, no, a young woman, in her late 20s, sitting beneath the bridge, barely shielded by a torn sheet of plastic. She wasn't lying down or lost in sleep like others he had passed. She was awake, alert, and hungrily tearing into a paper-wrapped sandwich with both hands, like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Her frame was thin, her clothes damp and clinging to her body, but not the kind of ragged hopelessness he expected. There was something striking about her cheekbones high, her mouth sharp, and her deep blue eyes, vivid even under the dim yellow streetlight, seemed too intelligent for the streets. When Lucian stepped closer, his footsteps echoed on the wet pavement. She looked up fast, startled. Fear flooded her face as she clutched the sandwich close, her back pressed against the bridge wall. Lucian raised his hand slightly, not to threaten, but to calm. His voice came low, steady, worn thin by too many sleepless nights. "Do you want to make a lot of money and have a home, at least for a while?" The woman's bright blue eyes narrowed, guarded and sharp. "Who are you? What are you going to do?" "I'm Lucien Varga," he said without pause, "and I need a wife. Quickly." Lucien didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked on hers, sharp, cold, and completely sure of himself. "I'll give you 250,000 euros, he said flatly. "Marry me, 1 year. You'll sign a contract. You'll live where I tell you, act how I need you to act, and after 1 year, we file for divorce and go our separate ways. You'll walk away with the money, a new life, no strings." His voice didn't waver, not even a little. He didn't care to explain the legal trap his father had left. He wasn't interested in sympathy or approval. "This isn't about love. I don't have time to fall in love. I need a wife. You're here. I'm offering you more than you'll ever get out of these streets. Say yes, and everything changes." He expected her to accept, quickly, maybe even cry or thank him. People always took what they were never meant to be offered. But she didn't cry. She didn't reach out. She didn't even look afraid. She laughed. It wasn't loud, but it cut deep, sharp and unexpected, like glass breaking in a quiet room. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing as the corners of her mouth curved in disbelief. "So, you think I'm desperate enough to sell myself because I'm sleeping under concrete?" she said softly, her voice rough but clear. "You think I'm going to let you buy me just because I'm cold and hungry?" Lucian's jaw tightened. The woman, dirty, tired, without a home, suddenly didn't seem like someone who needed saving. She seemed like someone who couldn't be tamed, and that made his blood simmer. He had come here with a clear plan. Fast, clean, simple. But now, the stranger before him was shaking it all with nothing more than a quiet laugh and a stubborn stare. She rose slowly from the damp concrete, brushing crumbs from her lap with quiet dignity. Her limbs trembled from the cold, but her gaze was steady as she walked toward Lucian, stopping only a step away. Rain still trickled from the bridge's edge, but she didn't flinch. "My name is Anna Reed," she said, standing firmly in front of him. "I'll accept your proposal." Her voice was calm but strong, "but only if you agree to 2 things. She held up a finger. "First, you don't control me like some lifeless puppet. This is a deal, not a leash. We both get something, and we respect that." Then she turned her head slightly and raised her hand, pointing down the street where a small group of children huddled near a broken wall, wrapped in makeshift blankets. "Second, we help them. They eat. They get warm. Even if this is fake," she said, her voice softening, "it doesn't mean it can't be used to do something real." Lucian said nothing for a long moment. He had expected her to demand clothes, comfort, security, for herself, but she hadn't. She thought of dignity, of autonomy, and of children with nothing. He gave a single nod. "Done," he said quietly. Then he glanced at his watch, the rain softly tapping against his shoulders. "I'll be back here tomorrow," he said, voice firm and direct. "Same time. I'll take you to my office. The contract will be signed there in the presence of my lawyer. Everything will be official, legal and clear." He looked at her one last time, nodding slightly. "We'll keep it professional. 1 year, no more, no less." Without another word, Lucian turned and walked back to his car. The engine started. The taillights glowed red in the drizzle, and he drove off into the night, leaving Anna beneath the bridge, standing still among the shadows and distant sounds of a city that had never noticed her until now. A strange agreement had just begun, between a man desperate to keep control of his empire and a woman who had already lost everything, except her will to choose. 2 days later, the union was made official, not with vows or ceremonies, but through a quiet legal process in a private downtown office. There was no wedding dress, no aisle, no music, just the signing of documents in front of a seasoned attorney named Matteo Leone. The setting was modest, a polished walnut desk, a quiet room, and the weight of an agreement that bound two strangers together for a year. There were no guests, no family, no photographers. The only people present were Lucien, Anna, in the simple but clean outfit he had provided, Matteo the lawyer, and Lucien's longtime friend and business advisor, Toby Mensah, who stood silently in the corner. There were no sparkling rings to mark the occasion. Matteo handed them a pair of plain gold bands, just enough to finalize the paperwork. No speeches, no celebrations, just a shared glance and the scratching of pens against legal pages. And with that, Anna Reed, once invisible beneath a bridge, became, in the eyes of the law, Mrs. Varga. The ride to Lucien's penthouse was quiet. Anna sat still beside him, the car moving smoothly through the city like a vessel cutting through fog. When they arrived, the building towered above the skyline, its glass and steel frame gleaming like a fortress. Inside, the penthouse was vast and cold, decorated in a modern minimalist style with slate-gray walls, sharp-edged furniture, and an air of silence that swallowed sound. No warmth, no signs of a life lived. As Lucien led her through the space, Anna followed quietly, absorbing the contrast from the damp cement of the streets to the polished marble beneath her shoes. He opened the door to her room, large, spotless, and sterile. The bed was made with crisp sheets. A row of new clothes hung beside the wardrobe. On the dresser, a full set of toiletries and basic skincare products were neatly arranged. Everything had been prepared before her arrival. Lucien turned to her then, expression unreadable. "You'll stay here. This room is yours. You don't leave it without permission. You don't speak to anyone. No calls, no devices, no questions. This is not a marriage. It's an agreement. Stick to it." Anna hesitated, glancing around the room once more before looking back at him. "Is there any food?" she asked quietly. Lucien didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway. She didn't press further. Hunger had taught her to expect little. She had not come here for comfort. She had come to fulfill a contract. She understood the rules, and she intended to follow them to the letter. Her voice was calm, her words measured. "Understood. I'll play my part. You won't have trouble from me." Then she stepped inside her room and closed the door behind her, alone but certain. That evening, Lucien descended the stairs from his study to inform Anna that dinner had been set on the table. He hadn't expected much, just the usual acknowledgement and retreat. But when she turned around from the hallway, something in him paused. She was standing near the entry to the dining area, freshly showered, dressed in the simple but neat clothes he had provided. But the transformation was undeniable. Her skin, once dull from exposure, had a warm flush now, as if life had returned to it. Her long dark hair, washed and brushed, fell softly against her shoulders, catching the low light. And those eyes, clear, deep blue, steady, held something he hadn't expected to see, a calm strength. She no longer looked like the frail woman beneath the bridge. She looked composed, distant, and entirely unlike the kind of woman he was used to noticing. He said nothing. Compliments weren't a language he knew, so he looked away, simply nodding toward the dining room. Over the following days, the silence between them remained, except for the moments they were forced to engage, usually when Lucienne announced another appearance they had to make together, a dinner or charity gala where Mr. and Mrs. Varga were expected to play the part of a devoted couple. It was for the sake of Matteo Leone, the lawyer who was closely observing the legitimacy of their union, and the Varga Media Board, whose questions grew louder. During those brief moments, Anna would speak carefully, and little by little he began to learn who she was. She had studied financial technology and regulatory systems at the Wharton School of Business, earning her master's degree under a full merit scholarship. She had climbed quickly, becoming senior analyst at a major data security firm in less than a year, only to be accused of internal fraud by her own supervisor after she received a promotion he believed belonged to him. The case cost her everything: her job, her apartment, her reputation. She spoke of it without emotion, her words clean and deliberate, never asking for pity. Lucien listened, more than he expected to, though his face remained unreadable. Everyone had a story, he told himself. Hers didn't make her special, just human. And he wasn't here for human connection, so even as curiosity stirred, he folded it away, keeping his distance. He was not going to let a contract become a complication. At one such event, held in a private art gallery downtown, Anna moved quietly beside Lucienne, her posture composed, dressed in a sleek navy gown that fit her without effort. She didn't charm with loud laughter or shallow compliments. Instead, she listened, responded with insight, and when prompted, made clear, thoughtful remarks about policy, economics, and global press ethics. Her presence was magnetic, subtle, but strong, drawing admiration from those around her. But not everyone was simply impressed. Among the crowd was Marcello Duval, a calculated figure in his late 50s with a polished manner and eyes that scanned people like headlines. A longtime adversary of Lucienne's and a board member with ambitions of his own, Marcello approached under the pretense of friendly curiosity. With a glass of wine in one hand and a gracious smile, he began to ask Anna gentle but pointed questions. Where she and Lucien had met, how long they'd known each other, whether their union had been sudden or expected. Anna, unaware of his identity but alert to his tone, answered with polite deflection. She had learned long ago, during her time at the Wharton School, and especially after her career was sabotaged, that truth wasn't always safe, especially in rooms like this, where people smiled at you with intentions far different from their words. She sidestepped every inquiry with a blend of wit and grace, never once appearing evasive, yet offering nothing that could be used against her. Marcello's smile thinned, his curiosity unsatisfied, while Anna sipped from her glass, steady and unreadable. It was during this conversation that the weight of Varga Media International's crisis began to swirl through the gathering. Rumors traveled fast. The Chicago Chronicle, one of the group's leading tabloids, had become the center of a legal firestorm. A state senator had sued the publication for releasing an investigative article that accused him of corruption. The problem wasn't just the lawsuit itself, but the fact that the article had gone to print without verifiable sources. The author, a senior journalist eager to break the story, had bypassed editorial checks. Now the company was being asked to prove its claims, or face tens of millions in damages and possibly lose the Chronicle's publishing license altogether. The whispers spread around the room like perfume, sweet and dangerous. Investors, partners, and executives all began to shift their conversations, but Anna remained composed. If she was affected, she didn't show it. Lucien, from a distance, observed both her silence and her restraint. She didn't just carry herself well, she protected what little space she had left in a world always ready to take. Lucien had warned her clearly. She was to stay out of the company's affairs. That boundary had been set early, sharp and final, as if she might break something just by being near it. "This has nothing to do with you," he had said, not cruelly, but with a quiet firmness that made it clear the subject wasn't open for discussion. But that night, he left the penthouse again, silent and tense. his expression darkened by something heavier than stress. Anna had seen his reflection as he paused in the mirror near the front door, his shoulders drawn, jaw clenched, not like a man thinking, but like one running out of moves. He wasn't just under pressure, he was scared. The lawsuit wasn't just a scandal, it was a threat to everything he had built. The penalty they were facing could destroy Varga Media International. If they lost, not only would they owe tens of millions, but they could lose their right to publish. The Chronicle could be shut down, and with it, any credibility the company still held. She waited until he was gone, then slipped quietly into his study, a room usually locked behind him like a vault. Tonight, he'd forgotten. Inside, she moved quickly but carefully, her eyes scanning every page on the desk. Internal letters, case updates, annotated drafts. She didn't remove anything. Instead, she pulled a small, nearly weightless micro camera from the bottom of her toiletries pouch, one of the few things she had kept with her. With no phone or devices of her own, this was all she had. She photographed every page, certain he wouldn't return until morning. Then she took the risk of going out into the city, the wind sharp against her coat, walking quickly to the old bridge where Mia, an old friend and out-of-work investigative journalist, was still living. They crouched together under a faded blanket and examined each photo. Mia saw what Anna had sensed: holes, inconsistencies, evidence that didn't align. It was too neat, too perfectly constructed. Someone had staged parts of the story to collapse under pressure. But now Anna faced a harder question. Not what she had discovered, but what to do with it. Lucien didn't trust easily. She had broken his rule. And worse, she had shown the files to someone else. How was she going to ask for the entire case folder? How was she going to tell him that what he feared most might be real, but that she and a friend from the street might be his only chance at turning it around? The next morning, Lucien had chosen to remain at home, worn down by sleepless nights and the rising storm of headlines and shareholder pressure. He was seated in his study, reviewing the latest legal correspondence, when Anna knocked gently on the door and stepped inside. Her tone was cautious, almost apologetic. "There's someone here to see you," she said. Lucien raised his head, brows narrowing. "I'm not expecting anyone," he said flatly. But when he followed her to the front of the penthouse, he stopped cold. Standing at the threshold was Mia, slim, pale, dressed in worn boots and a threadbare coat, her old laptop clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. Her presence clashed with the sleek glass and luxury that surrounded her, and Lucien stiffened instantly. Anna stepped forward, already prepared for his reaction. "She's the friend I told you about," she began, explaining how Mia had helped analyze the photos, how they'd begun piecing together inconsistencies, how she believed Mia could help find what the lawyers and executives hadn't. Lucien's expression hardened. Without warning, he grabbed Anna's arm and pulled her aside into the hallway. "I told you, this isn't some street-side guessing game," he hissed, anger thick in his voice. "This is bigger than you think. You're dragging her into something that could ruin all of us." His words were sharp, his breathing unsteady. Lucien was a man used to control, calculated, measured decisions. He didn't trust easily, especially not with something this explosive. Anna tried to explain, but he cut her off, pacing a few steps in the hallway before turning back. Then, behind him, Mia spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "Just let me try, sir. Give me a chance. That's all I'm asking." Lucien froze. He didn't speak for several seconds, staring at the ground, his jaw tense. Finally, he looked at both women, exhaled deeply, and gave a slow nod. "Fine," he said, pointing toward Anna's room. "You have a few days. I want results, not guesses. If this leads nowhere, I shut it all down. Understood?" From that moment, Anna's room became a war room. The printed case file was handed over to Mia, who immediately began sorting through timelines, testimonies, and internal memos. Anna cleared out her drawers to make space for notebooks, taped leads and photos to the walls, and created a running timeline of inconsistencies. Lucien, though reluctant at first, gradually found himself drawn into their nightly sessions, contributing what he knew from board meetings, legal briefings, and confidential staff conversations. The three of them began working in rhythm, Anna decoding political connections, Mia tracing false source trails, and Lucien providing access to internal databases and overlooked archives. They followed misleading evidence, chased down former employees, and reviewed every edited draft of the article at the center of the lawsuit. Though they rarely slept, they began to uncover something more than journalistic recklessness: deliberate manipulation, buried files, and signs of interference far above editorial level. And with every new clue, Lucien's skepticism thinned, replaced slowly by something else: belief, not just in the case, but in them. Lucien didn't notice the shift in himself at first. It began in quiet moments, the way he no longer closed doors between them, how he found himself lingering when Anna spoke, or listening more carefully than he ever intended to. His edges, once sharp and rigid, started to soften. The man who had lived in control and silence began cracking, not with weakness, but with something unfamiliar: warmth. She challenged him, met his stare without fear, moved through his world without trying to belong to it, and yet somehow belonged more than anyone else ever had. Her clarity of thought, her discipline, the way she immersed herself in the case without expecting praise, it all got under his skin. Lucien had built walls high and cold, but Anna moved around them like she had known the blueprint all along. Slowly, without realizing it, he began to fall, not into distraction, but into something real, something dangerous. At the same time, their investigation was taking shape. Each thread they pulled revealed something darker beneath the surface. The fabricated article at the heart of the lawsuit had been written by a man named Elliot Granger, a journalist with a history of ethically gray reporting. What disturbed them most was not just the carelessness of his claims, but the deliberate structure of it all. Elliot had been working closely with Marcello Duval, Lucien's longtime rival, feeding him pre-publication drafts and receiving compensation routed through a consultancy with known ties to Duval's holding company. It wasn't random. It was a trap. A calculated, multi-layered scheme designed to collapse Varga Media International's credibility, bury Lucien in litigation, and allow Marcello to buy the crumbling company at a fraction of its worth. And as they followed the money and messages, Lucien saw clearly, this wasn't just a corporate rivalry anymore. It was war. And the woman he had once paid to play his wife was now the only person he could truly trust to help him fight back. It had taken days of quiet observation and risk, but Anna and Mia had finally found a crack in Marcello Duval's circle, a low-level associate named Gregor Voss, who liked liquor, attention, and loose tongues after midnight. He wasn't powerful, but he was close enough to the inner workings to have seen the wrong documents and heard the wrong conversations. He frequented a dim, overpriced lounge downtown that catered to men with more secrets than sense. That's where they set their plan. Dangerous? Yes. Reckless, maybe. But they needed proof, something that connected Marcello directly to the planted article and the funding that backed the lawsuit. Anna would go in alone, dressed to disarm, pose as entertainment for the evening, and get him to talk. Mia would be nearby, running the audio capture through a concealed recorder in the private VIP suite. It was a calculated move, bold and brutal, and both women knew the risks. But Anna didn't hesitate. She had faced worse for less, and this time, she had something to fight for. She entered the room late, the lights low, the air thick with perfume and expensive smoke. Her look was deliberate: platinum blonde wig, dark lashes, crimson lipstick, and a black leather dress cut to show just enough to distract but not expose. She moved like she didn't belong to anyone, like she had no past to answer for. Gregor, already 2 drinks in, was leaning back on the velvet couch, smug and expectant. The bottle came first, then a whisper in his ear, a brush of her fingers along his jacket, and finally, the lap dance. Slow, suggestive, designed to loosen him more than just physically. What Gregor didn't know was that every word was being captured, every movement calibrated. In the corner of the darkened suite stood Lucian, dressed in head-to-toe black, a jacket fitted to his frame, and dark sunglasses covering eyes that refused to blink. He was there under the guise of a regular patron, guarding her from the shadows. But what he hadn't expected was the way she moved, so fluid, so fearless, that he forgot for a second what this was about. His jaw tightened, his pulse reacting in ways he hadn't prepared for. She wasn't just gathering evidence, she was commanding the room, and he couldn't take his eyes off her. Anna never flinched, even when Gregor began to talk. Whispered pieces at first, how Marcello had promised him a promotion, how the senator was just a puppet, how the article had been bought and shaped before Elliot Granger ever touched a keyboard. Names, amounts, dates, just enough to draw the net tighter. He laughed between slurred words, thinking she was just a dancer with nowhere else to go, oblivious to the trap he had stepped into. Then she gently pulled away, smiling as she leaned into his ear, whispering something too soft for the recorder, but sharp enough to slice his ego. "Thanks for the story, baby," she said. With a final spin, she slipped off his lap and walked away, with the calm of a queen who had just claimed a throne. Mia met her at the back hallway with the recorder tucked into her coat, both women exchanging a look of triumph. Gregor Voss, half drunk and confused, was left sitting alone in the suite, realization dawning too late. They were gone before he could sober up, the bottle still half full, and the air still thick with her scent. Outside, the rain had started. Lucian was waiting beside the black car, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak as she climbed in beside him, the silence charged with too much. Admiration, jealousy, maybe even a tinge of guilt. She was still glowing from the inside out, not just from the rush of the moment, but from something deeper. She had done it, not as a victim, not as a hired wife, but as the woman he was beginning to understand he had never deserved, but somehow couldn't stop wanting. The day of the shareholder assembly arrived with the tension of a storm about to break. The auditorium was packed, not only with board members and investors of Varga Media International, but also with regulators, rival executives, and members of the national press, cameras flashing from every angle. No one knew what to expect. Whispers filled the air, rumors of scandal, last-minute damage control, even speculation that Lucien Varga might resign. But what came next left the entire room breathless. Just as Lucien approached the podium, he turned, not to speak, but to gesture behind him. From the aisle, Mia emerged, stunned to see the sea of lights and faces awaiting her. She hadn't come for this. She had only intended to support from the sidelines, but Lucien had made a choice. Today, the truth deserved every voice it came through. As she stepped forward, Anna gave her hand a tight squeeze and Lucian simply nodded. The moment belonged to her now. Mia stood at the front, nerves thick in her throat but resolve even stronger. She spoke calmly at first, then with growing confidence, detailing the coordinated sabotage orchestrated by Marcello Duval and his associates, supported by falsified documents, planted sources, and a network of coercion. She laid bare how the lawsuit against the Chicago Chronicle had never been about ethics. It had been a hostile bid for power. Her voice didn't shake when she named names, and when she revealed the paper trail that linked the scandal back to Victor Sterling, the room shifted from curiosity to stunned silence. The evidence was projected behind her. Emails, bank transactions, confidential memos, meticulously documented. Then, from the wings, Lucian and Anna stepped forward. Anna stood proudly, her expression radiant not from ego, but from something deeper, watching a friend rise from shadow into strength. It was never about her. She had made a promise to herself and Mia beneath a rain-soaked bridge, and today, that promise had bloomed into justice. The arrest warrants were issued within hours. Marcello Duval and two of his co-conspirators were taken into custody that very afternoon. Victor Sterling, stripped of reputation and legal cover, was handed over to federal authorities by evening. The fall was swift, brutal, and absolute. But in the aftermath, as applause filled the hall, Lucien remained still. He turned to Mia first, shook her hand with quiet gratitude. "I underestimated you," he said softly. "And I was wrong. You didn't just save a company. You reminded me what truth is worth." Then, as the cameras still rolled and every reporter leaned forward for the next headline, Lucien turned toward Anna. Without hesitation, he reached for her hand and held it. Not like a formality, but something certain, something real. "And this," he said, his voice echoing across the microphone, "is my wife. The woman who stood by me when everyone else stepped back. The one who brought the light in when everything was closing in." Anna met his gaze, eyes soft with disbelief and joy. In that moment, there were no disguises, no arrangements, only the truth between them. The crowd stood, the cameras flashed, and for the first time, Lucien Varga wasn't just a CEO reclaiming control of his empire. He was a man standing beside the woman who had rebuilt him. The noise of headlines had begun to fade, and in its place, quieter victories were taking shape. Mia, no longer just a forgotten name beneath a city bridge, had found her footing again. With help from Anna and Lucien, she had been offered a freelance investigative series with a respected news agency and several invitations to speak on press ethics and resilience. For the first time in years, she was no longer invisible. It wasn't just about shelter anymore, it was about purpose. One evening, after the storm had passed and the media attention had slowed to a hum, Anna stood alone on the balcony of the penthouse. The air was crisp, the skyline quiet under a soft amber glow. She leaned on the railing, letting the breeze wrap around her, lost in thoughts she couldn't quite name. So much had changed, and yet there were parts of her still sifting through the rubble of what used to be. Lucien stepped out quietly behind her, his usual sharpness replaced with something gentler. He didn't speak right away, only stood beside her until she looked at him. "Anna," he said, voice low, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." She waited, still and calm. "I judged you," he admitted. "Not just for where I found you, but for who I assumed you were. And I didn't tell you the truth, not about the will or why I chose you." His eyes searched hers, no longer guarded. "I picked you because I thought you'd be easy to control, someone with no options who wouldn't push back. But you turned out to be the one person who pushed me to see things clearly. I'm sorry for all the ways I underestimated you." He paused, the words heavy but sincere. "If you want to walk away now, I'd understand. But if there's any part of you that still wants to stay, I'd be proud to call you my wife. Not because of a contract, but because of who you are." Anna looked at him for a long moment, her expression soft but uncertain, the quiet wind brushing against her hair as the city lights glimmered in the distance. "So," she said gently, her voice steady but edged with something deeper, "you love me now because I saved your company?" Her words weren't bitter, just honest. Lucien flinched slightly, not from anger, but from the weight of his own failings. He stepped closer, eyes never leaving hers, and shook his head slowly. "No," he said, voice raw. "That's not why. That's just how I finally saw you for who you really are." He reached for her hand again, holding it carefully, as though it might slip away. "I was wrong. So wrong to think I could fix everything with contracts and cash, like love was just another business transaction. I didn't even think I was capable of loving someone. I didn't grow up with that kind of affection." My father gave me expectations, pressure, his cold ambition. My mother left before I could remember her face. The only real warmth I ever knew came from my grandmother, and when she passed, I thought that part of me died too. He paused, emotion trembling just beneath the surface. But then you came in, this woman with nothing but strength in her eyes, who never begged, never lied, never let me walk all over her. You made me see the world again, not just as something to conquer, but something to care about. You gave me back a part of myself I thought was gone forever. Anna's eyes softened as she listened, her heart aching at the truth in his voice. She no longer needed proof of his love. She could feel it in every word, in every pause where pride used to be. And for the first time, what began as survival between them now bloomed into something real, something whole. They stood by the tall windows of the penthouse one quiet evening, the city stretching out below like a sea of golden lights. Lucien turned to her, fingers laced with hers, his voice soft but urgent. "Come work with me," he said, searching her eyes. "Not because I owe you, not because of what you've already done, but because I can't imagine doing this without you anymore." Anna smiled, the kind of smile that held both affection and resolve. "Lucien," she said gently, "I love you. But I need to rebuild what I lost, on my own terms. I want to use my voice again, not from your shadow, but from mine." His jaw tensed as he stepped closer, hands moving to her waist, his forehead resting gently against hers. "I'm not asking you to stand behind me," he whispered. "I want you beside me, where you've always belonged." She closed her eyes, breathing in the moment, her heart full. "I know," she said, "but I need to walk this road first." She decides to return to financial technology, under her real name this time, but with the same drive that once made her unstoppable. This time she will work in a new position, perhaps leading a strategic innovations unit or spearheading fintech compliance within one of the most respected divisions of Varga Media International. There, she will have the autonomy to pursue ethical advancements, transparency, and justice within the industry, without having to fear any dark forces silencing her. And they decide not to divorce. Their unwilling marriage, which began with a strange will clause and an unlikely meeting under a bridge, has now become a true love, a strong bond between two souls who have weathered storms together. For a long second, he didn't speak. Then he nodded slowly, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Promise me you won't go far," he murmured against her hair. "Promise me we keep choosing each other." She nodded, her voice steady and warm. "Always. No more contracts. Just love." And in that quiet space between two hearts still healing, they held on to each other, no longer bound by circumstance but by something deeper, something freely chosen. The sky over Chicago glowed with the soft hues of evening, casting lilac and amber reflections across the river. Anna thought they were simply going out for a quiet walk, a small tradition they had grown fond of. But as Lucien gently led her toward the old bridge, something shifted in the air. She slowed her steps when she saw the faint lights ahead, then stopped altogether when the scene unfolded before her eyes. The bridge, once a place of silence, shadow, and despair, had been reborn. Vibrant murals decorated its stone pillars, scenes of resilience, color, and hope. Strings of warm fairy lights traced the edges, and the air carried the faint hum of guitar strings and laughter. But what caught Anna's breath was the small crowd gathered near the heart of the space. People she recognized. The few friends she had made from the streets, the ones she had helped during her hardest days, stood beaming, each wearing a white t-shirt printed with her smiling face, and the words, "Thank you, Anna." She covered her mouth in surprise as they cheered softly, parting to reveal a small platform decorated with painted flowers and handwritten notes of gratitude. Lucien held her hand tighter as they walked forward. The space had been transformed into a community art haven, one she and Lucian had quietly funded, but she never imagined would be part of this night. Then, as the last rays of sunlight slipped below the skyline, Lucien turned to face her, his expression tender, touched by emotion he could no longer hide. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a dark blue velvet box, the fabric catching the soft lights above. Inside lay a delicate ring, its sapphire center gleaming like her eyes when they were filled with fire and determination, the diamonds around it shaped like stars, constant, guiding. "Anna," he said softly, his voice deeper with meaning than she'd ever heard it. "Anna Reed, love of my life. You gave me more than I ever thought I deserved. A second chance, a reason to believe. I thought I was saving you that day, but it was you who saved me." As their lips met beneath the fading golden sky, the world seemed to pause for them, wrapped in that rare kind of love that had been earned through storms and fire. But just as they sank deeper into the warmth of their embrace, the sky let out a soft rumble and gentle raindrops began to fall. At first, it was light, almost playful, but within seconds the soft drizzle turned into a sudden summer downpour. Laughter erupted from the small crowd gathered around the bridge, and one by one their friends and supporters began to dash for shelter beneath nearby tents and art displays, some calling out joyful wishes as they fled the rain. Lucian and Anna remained where they were, soaked and breathless, smiling at the absurd beauty of it all. After the brief rain, they left the bridge together and returned home for a quiet celebration with a few close friends. Nothing grand, just warmth, laughter, and the feeling of peace they hadn't known in years. But as the evening unfolded in comfort, a knock suddenly echoed through the house. One of the maids, surprised by the unexpected visitor, moved quickly to the door and returned moments later with a hesitant expression. Without a word, she stepped aside, ushering in a woman wrapped in a simple gray coat, her posture stiff with uncertainty. Lucien turned slowly, his heart dropping, as he saw the one person he never thought he'd see again. His mother, the woman who had once walked out of his life when he needed her most, now standing in his home, eyes searching for something he wasn't sure he could give. Lucian stood quietly in the center of the room, staring at the woman who had given him life, but left him to face the darkest parts of it alone. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled, not with anger, but with years of pain buried too long. He asked her why she had walked away, why she hadn't come back when the doctor said he would survive, why she let his grandmother carry the weight she was meant to bear. She wept, tried to explain, but the words didn't undo the silence of all those years. Lucien cried too, not because he wanted to forgive, but because he had hoped, somewhere deep down, that there might be a reason that made it all make sense. But it didn't. He listened, but his heart stayed closed. "You didn't leave when it was hard," he said quietly. "You left when I was helpless. I needed a mother, not a goodbye." She reached out to touch his hand, but he gently stepped back. "I found strength in the people who stayed, in the woman I chose, and in the man I became despite it all." Then, slowly, he turned away, tears still in his eyes, but peace beginning to settle in his chest. He didn't look back. If you followed their journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that speak to the heart. Sometimes closure doesn't come through forgiveness, but through the choice to protect the life you've rebuilt. Not everyone deserves a second chance, especially those who walked away when you couldn't walk at all.